The last time I did one of these kitchen vlogs, I asked the I Ching, what should I talk about in my next kitchen vlog? And I came up with the Army. So here I am talking about the Army. Now, I'd never went into the Army, but I turned draft age during the later 1960s, and therefore I had to register for the draft, and I got a draft card. And I still have my draft card, but this isn't the one that they gave me. I registered, this is my registration right here. I registered July 29th, 1969, registered for the draft. And I was 1A, of course, which meant I was draftable. But that was when the Vietnam War was going on. Every evening on TV, they had reports about the Vietnam War. And I wasn't as concerned about Vietnam as I was concerned about just going into the military generally, because when I was growing up, I had I had a somewhat independent attitude. It was kind of weird. Part of it was because our family was never really close. There were no expressions of love in our family. For example, I saw it in some other friends, and it always surprised me when I saw it. A couple of examples I can give you. I was with a friend. We had to stop by his parents' house, and we walked into the house. His mother was in the kitchen. He walked into the kitchen and just gave his mother a big hug, and she just fine with it. He gave his father a hug. And I was just so surprised when I saw that affection. We never had affection like that in our household. Second example, I had another friend, and I went by his house to pick him up because we were going to go down to the beach. And when he came to the front door, his mother came up behind him to say, "Have fun at the beach, you guys." But in the process, she threw her arms around her son, kissed him on the neck, and he just kind of stood there and accepted it like he was totally used to it. I was shocked when I saw affection like that in other families because we never had that kind of affection in our household. I wasn't an irresponsible or a troublemaker when I was a kid growing up. I was just very independent. So, for example, my parents paid for my sister to go to college, and then when she finished college, my brother went. They paid for him 4 years of college. And then when it was my turn to go, they said they were going to pay my way if I wanted them to. But I said, no, I don't need your money. I'll be fine. And I didn't. I didn't accept any money from my parents when I went to college. And again, I wasn't being disrespectful or anything. I was just very independent of my parents, almost like they were accessories in my life. I couldn't wait to get away from them. I grew up in New England, small town in New England. And then eventually I moved to California. But going back to that time when I was draft age, it was the Vietnam War era. I didn't like the Vietnam War. I didn't like the fact that people in the government and Congress were sending young people, mostly boys and young men, to Vietnam against their will. They had no choice. The big issue I had back then was just going into the Army. I was so independently minded. I just knew it wasn't going to work out for me with some sergeant barking orders at me, and I had no choice but to obey. And they were going to teach me how to use a gun? No, I've never owned a gun. I've never held a gun, never wanted to hold a gun. I don't like guns. Not that I'm opposed to them. People can own guns if they want. I don't have any issues with that. I just don't want to hold one. I don't like guns. Back then we couldn't do much as far as protesting the Vietnam War because I lived in a very small town. In fact, it wasn't even a town. It was considered a village, and it was one of 5 villages that made up a town in that area. If you've seen the movie Mystic Pizza, I grew up in the town of Mystic. Although in the movie there were only 2 scenes shot in Mystic. The rest were all shot in the borough of Stonington, which was one of the other 5 villages. The borough of Stonington's a beautiful area. Anyways, there wasn't much we could do because there were no big cities close by where we could go to protest. What I did, it was something that we could do in this little small town, is I went around with white paint and I painted war on stop signs. Stop war. I was one of those that painted those signs. That was a long time ago. So I think the statute of limitations has run out on that one. They can't come get me. Hopefully they won't come get me. But that was the most we could do. What had happened as far as the draft went was I waited to see what was going to happen as far as my lottery number. My brother and I are actually twins, so we were waiting to see what was going to happen. How high were they going to call up as far as draft numbers? And we waited to see what our number was going to be, and it was fairly high. It was way up there. I had an opportunity because I got a job fixing typewriters. I had an opportunity to get an apprenticeship. I could be in an apprenticeship program, and then they would delay my draft until I finished the apprenticeship program, which I think it was either a 3 or a 4-year program. So I waited to see what the lottery number was going to be, how high they were going to call in the numbers. And I want to say we were like up around 250 something, and they said they were going to call, they weren't going to call above like 150 to 200, somewhere in that range. So my brother and I, we figured we were safe. So I didn't do the apprenticeship program. I thought, okay, stay 1A, draftable, and hopefully nothing will happen. I mean, there could have been a major escalation in the war, some major air campaign against U.S. troops, and all of a sudden they are going to send everybody over there that's of draft age. Thankfully, none of that happened, and I didn't get called up. So they sent me a new draft card after I didn't get drafted the year that I was supposed to. I am now I-H, not available, which means that in the event of a crisis, I can be called up, but otherwise I'm not available for the draft. I still have my draft card. Isn't that amazing? And my registration card. I saved these. So such as some memorabilia, I guess, from those time periods. I never went into the military. I'm glad I didn't. I don't know what I would have done had I been called up for the draft. I thought about going to Canada. I didn't want to go that route because New England was cold in the wintertime, and I wanted to go to California. So I did think about, is Mexico an option for me? But as I said, I never got called. I never had to go into the military. I'm not opposed to the military. I wasn't opposed to people serving in Vietnam. But what did happen eventually that was actually kind of important, I talked in one of my earlier kitchen vlogs about having been in theater, and one of the plays I was in was Streamers, and it's a Vietnam War era play, and I was one of 3 soldiers, GIs, in a cadre room, and we were looking to eventually go to Vietnam, being shipped out to Vietnam, and all 3 of us had some fears about it. There was Roger, Billy, and Richie. We were the 3 guys in the room, and what we had to help us with the fear was the set designer had actually been to Vietnam, and he told us some of the horrific things that he had seen in Vietnam. I'll tell you just one. It's pretty gory. It's pretty bad, but these are things that he saw when he was in Vietnam. They raided a camp, the soldiers, a Viet Cong camp, because they knew they had captured one of America's soldiers and were holding the soldier in that camp. So they were trying to get in there to get the soldier out. And what the Viet Cong would do, because they would have paths through the forest, they would have tunnels, they would just run away. And then as soon as the soldiers left, they would come back and re-inhabit their camp again. So they got in there, no Viet Cong to be seen anywhere. They found the American soldier. This is the sad part. He was tied to a tree. They had been torturing him with a razor blade, and he was pretty bad. He was pretty much beyond recovering at this point. And when they approached him, he said that it was a haunting image to him. The guy, the soldier, looked at them with this pleading look on his face, as if to say, please, put me out of my misery. And they did. One of the guys held a gun to his temple and basically blew his brains out. And when the gun was going up there, he had this look of, like peace, this peaceful look on his face, like it's going to all be over now. That was just one of the things that he told us, that some of the horrors of war, all wars are horrible, but there were things that were done in the Vietnam War that were pretty horrific. And so it helped us as far as actors to know what we were supposed to really be afraid of, because being soldiers, we would have heard a lot of these stories. So anyways, never went into the Army, never missed it, never had to learn how to use a gun. I'm very thankful. I don't have anything to say against anyone who has served in the military. I think they do fine things. They're brave. They help to keep the peace in the United States. I love living in the United States, but I just think Army life would not have worked for me. I would have been a wreck, a psychological wreck. So that's my story about the Army.